Yes people, Tech House Market crew, what is going on? My name's Liam Cox and today we're going to get into how to create wicked vocal atmospheric textures and stabs with the vocals already in your track. So if we jump straight into it, I've got some drums here, just a nice drum loop with some bass and a vocal. So if we just take a listen. And it's a bit plain and boring in a minute, but there is some stuff we can do to sort of spice it up, and we can do that using the vocals that we already have in the track. So the first one we can do is create a nice atmospheric sort of pad or loop. And the way I like to do this is if we create like a quarter note of a loop up here and then just skip through the vocal and then see if any bits jump out that would be nice. So if we just take a listen now. So I think the first one that we landed on this, we could use to create a really nice texture underneath what we've got already. So if we cut this out and then we can drag it onto a new channel and use this to create our loop. So if we copy this down, and because it's a quarter note, we want to loop this, but first of all we're gonna make it more fitting and more of a background sound. To do this, I like to use a plugin called Soundtoys Echo Boy. I know a lot of people that use this, but there is a preset that I really like that's perfect for this. So if you go into presets, then if you go into feedbackers, it's called reverb loop, and if we just pull back the feedback here and we click play, it gives a really nice echo effect towards the end. So if we couple this with a Valhalla vintage verb, this just creates a bit more depth in the sound. I like to just scroll through the presets, see what sounds good. Might be a bit too much. Something like this might do the job. So now we've got our sort of texture that we're going to loop. What we want to do is bounce this in place, which basically creates a new audio file with the reverb and the Echo Boy. So now we can go ahead and delete this original one that we found, and we're going to do a quarter note loop. So what I like to do is just scroll through, find a bit that might sound good. Something like this might do the job. So what I like to do now is cut this out, trim off the ends. And the benefit to bouncing this out rather than doing it from the original is that once the actual sample ends, the reverb obviously and the Echo Boy cuts off. Whereas if you were to do it before, you'd have a massive tail with reverb and it would just make it really muddy, basically. Cool, so now if we loop this, if we go for our whole loop, and if we click play, sometimes these take a bit of cleaning up once you've got the sample in place. So you can see there's a click there, so if we just fade out each side. Cool. And because this is a sort of background sound for our other elements to sort of sit on, it's good to sort of EQ this quite heavily. So I like to cut a lot of the low end out to get rid of the muddiness, and also some top end sort of to taste, depending on what sort of feel you want the atmospheric to sort of have. Also, when you do this sort of stuff, you can get quite a lot of ringing points in these sort of sounds. So it's good to sort of go ahead and do a bit of surgical EQing. So if we do like a slight increase here in one of the EQ points, and then we just sweep across the sound, and we can sort of, you'll definitely know when you hear that ringing sound. So there we go. And you can also visually see it as well. So now if we just go ahead and do about -3 to -4 dB on this. Cool, so now we've got our loop. So if we play this now with everything else. Wicked. So this, now you can hear it in the mix. It's always a good idea to sort of EQ it while it's in the mix, so you have everything in context. And this sort of stuff is really good because obviously you've got this from the vocal that you're already using in the track, so you know it's going to be in key, you know it's going to work with what you've got. It's just about finding the right sort of bit of your vocal to create into an atmospheric texture. We can go a step further with this, so to give it more movement, etc., we can add a kickstart onto this, which is sort of obviously duck when the kick hits, so this will give it a bit more movement. And even better than this, we can use a shaper box by Cable Guys, and we can use the volume shaper. You can do a lot of stuff with this, but a good one I like to use, which is pretty hot at the minute, is the sort of stutter effect. So if we set it to a 1/16 and just a square shape, we can adjust the mix. If you want a bit more movement, and the good thing about this as well is you can also, this is multi-band, so you can adjust the volume modulation for a certain amount of frequency. So yeah, this is also, if we hear this in the mix with the shaper box, this is if you want more of like a sharper, like hard hitting, more attack sort of feel in your textures. So yeah, now we've got this in place, we can rename this texture. And there is something else that we can also add into this from our vocal, and that would be a sort of stab sound, and we can process it in a certain way that would basically fit in the track. So we're going to do the same sort of thing with the vocal. If we shorten the loop to a quarter note, and we try and find sort of a section that would work as a stab, so something with like a bit more attack, rather than like the softer loop, if that makes sense. But once you hear something, it will jump out, and yeah. It's also important to sort of mentally note, like, how do you want this to sound? Do you want it to be like a higher sound or like a low deep hit? So for example, if you wanted something low, you can find a part of the vocal which is like maybe an octave lower or a lower note. So it's always good to keep that in mind. So that's pretty cool. So if we can use, this is sort of quite a solid sound, it's got a nice attack, and I think with a bit of processing it would be good to use as a stab alongside our texture. So if we again do the same thing, if we cut this out, drag it down to a new channel, and right now it's going to sound a bit plain, a bit boring. So what we want to do is first listen to the sample. There's a few clicks in there, so if we do the same thing, bit of fading tool. Now we can EQ this. Just take out some of that muddiness in the low end. And there is a plugin that I really like to use on this sort of stuff, which is by Toolroom Records, and it's called Infinite. And it's super cool. Like, there's loads of presets that just work straight out of the box. But I like to use the sort of sound shapers to add a completely different dynamic to these sort of sounds, because right now it's pretty boring standard, anyone can sort of do this, but this Infinite plugin from Toolroom is super good to add a bit more like spice to sounds that would be boring. So yeah, I normally just like to go through the presets and then make some adjustments to to the LFO, delay, etc. So if we listen to this, so that's probably a bit too much delay, so bring that down. I also like to use their bit crunch, bit crunch saturation. It sounds super cool, and if you use correctly, it can give a really nice effect. So So, as I say, if it's used correctly and not overdone, it can give a really nice effect. Maybe some width. Maybe just hone down the reverb a little bit. Remove the decay slightly. Cool. So, with basically one plugin and an EQ, we've created a really nice sort of stab from the vocal that we originally had. Now it's just arranging, so maybe one every bar, and then see what this sounds like all together. Cool, and we can also, again, do the same sort of thing. If we wanted to add a kick start to the stab, give it a bit more movement when the kick ducks, or the shaper box. We can also use a Soundtoys Alter Boy if we wanted to pitch this up or down, give it a bit more variation. The forman's always good because it doesn't really mess with the key as such, so it'll always sound good pretty much whatever you've got it on. So -3 sounds pretty good, and you wouldn't be able to tell that this stab came from this vocal if you were listening to it. So yeah, that's how you sort of create some textures and stabs from the current vocal in the track. If we just listen through to it once more. Cool. So that is completely like original to us. No one else can copy that. And obviously the great thing, as I say, about doing it like this is everything's going to be in key. So the stab will be in key to your vocal and your bass, and also the texture because it has come from the vocal. So yeah, if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to Tech House Market. And if you want to see more content like this, comment below with what content you want to see, and we'll make it happen. I'll see you next time. Peace.